There's a particular kind of cold that lives inside a person long before winter ever arrives. It is not the cold of the temperature outside. It is the cold of knowing that if the system ever breaks down, if the truck stops coming, if the bill gets too high, if the power goes out for 3 days straight, you would not know what to do. That cold does not come from the weather. It comes from dependence, and most of us have been living inside it for so long, we have stopped noticing it. But there's a community living right now in the middle of Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana, surrounded by the same weather you live with, breathing the same February air, watching the same snowstorms roll in from the northwest. And they are warm, not because they have a better furnace, not because they have a bigger budget. They are warm because about 4 generations ago, they made a quiet decision. They decided that warmth was not something you paid for. It was something you built. And the difference between those two ideas, warmth as a subscription versus warmth as a skill, says more about the psychology of modern life than almost anything else I've ever come across. Here is the thing about the Amish that most people misunderstand. They are not refusing technology because of religion in any simple sense. They are not afraid of the modern world. They understand it. They watched it form. They watched their neighbors sign up one by one for the gas line, for the electric meter, for the fuel delivery schedule, for the propane contract, and they made a conscious, deliberate choice to stay outside of it, not out of ignorance, out of something much more psychologically sophisticated than that. They understood, in a way that most of us never get taught to understand, the relationship between dependency and identity. They understood that when you outsource a fundamental human need, you do not just change your habits, you change how you see yourself. You shift from someone who solves problems to someone who pays to have problems managed. And that shift, once it happens, is very hard to undo. Think about what it means to heat a home. Not the technical details, the psychological meaning. To keep your family warm in winter is one of the most primal human acts there is. It connects you to every ancestor you have ever had. For most of human history, the person who kept the fire was a person with knowledge, skill, and agency. They knew what burned. They knew how to build a structure that held heat. They knew how to read a fire. That knowledge was not incidental. It was identity. It was the feeling of being capable, of being competent, of being, in the deepest sense, a provider. Now ask yourself, when was the last time you thought about how your home gets warm? Not the bill, not the thermostat setting, the actual process. Most of us have no idea. We set a number on a wall panel and walk away. The warmth appears. We do not know where the fuel comes from, how the system works, what we would do if it stopped. We have traded that knowledge for convenience. And on the surface, that seems like a reasonable trade. But there is a cost to that trade that does not show up on your heating bill. It shows up in something harder to measure. It shows up in anxiety, in a low-level background hum of vulnerability that most people carry through winter without ever naming it. The feeling that the warmth you depend on is not really yours. It belongs to the system. You are renting it. And like all renters, you are one missed payment, one supply disruption, one equipment failure away from the cold. The Amish feel none of that. And it is not because they are tougher or more stoic. It is because their relationship with warmth is psychologically different at the root. They built the thing. They know how it works. They know what feeds it. And crucially, they know that what feeds it is everywhere around them, free, infinite, asking nothing. When you heat your home with a stove that burns anything that used to be alive, wood scraps, dried corn, old newspaper, cardboard, fallen branches, you are not just saving money. You are reconnecting with something much older than money. You are reconnecting with capability itself. The stove at the center of this story is called a barrel stove. It is not a complicated piece of technology. It is a 55-gallon steel drum, the kind you see rusting behind barns across the rural Midwest, fitted with a cast iron door, a set of legs, and a simple flue collar. The hardware kit that transforms that drum into a fully functioning home heating unit has been sold in agricultural supply stores and plain country general stores since the late 1930s. It costs somewhere between $40 and $60 today. The drum itself most people get for free. And yet, this stove will heat a full-size American home through a Midwestern winter. It will burn wood, corn cobs, walnut shells, scrap lumber, cardboard, dried leaves, paper, coal. It asks only one thing of its fuel, that it once contained carbon and will release heat when ignited. That is the entire requirement. In a world engineered around scarcity and exclusivity, this stove is the opposite of everything the market wants you to believe. It is abundant. It is flexible. It is free. Now here is where the psychology gets genuinely interesting. Because you might be wondering, if this stove is so effective, so affordable, so simple to build, why has almost no one in mainstream America ever heard of it? Why did your father not have one? Why did your local hardware store never carry the kit? Why did the contractor who built or renovated your house never mention it? The answer is not a mystery. It is not a coincidence. It is a pattern that shows up everywhere once you learn to recognize it. In 1976, the United States Department of Agriculture's Forest Service published a research report that compared 7 different residential heating systems on small farms across the Midwest. The barrel stove, what the report called a multifuel barrel-type conversion stove, won every category that mattered to a working family. Lowest installation cost, lowest fuel cost per unit of heat delivered, highest fuel flexibility, longest documented service life. It was, by every practical measure the researchers could apply, the most efficient, most resilient, and most affordable home heating option available. Then, between 1978 and 1988, a wave of new emission standards, insurance underwriting rules, and fire code ordinances quietly made it nearly impossible to legally install one in a newly constructed American home. The barrel stove was not banned by name, it was regulated out of existence by specification. The new rules required certified secondary combustion chambers, sealed catalytic converters, and EPA emissions tags that a $50 drum and a cast iron door kit could never carry. A working system that had heated American farmhouses for over a century was removed from the option set of the modern homeowner. And the companies that lobbied hardest for those new specifications were, by 1990, the same companies selling $1,500 EPA-certified wood stoves and $3,000 pellet stoves that ran on one specific fuel they also happened to sell. Think about what that means for a moment, not just as a practical fact about heating, but as a psychological reality about how dependent we have all been made without ever being asked for our consent. A stove that burns anything cannot be cornered by a market. A stove that burns only one certified, trademarked, proprietary fuel source can be cornered completely. The narrowing of the fuel was the business model. And the cost of that narrowing was not just measured in dollars, though the dollars are real and they are enormous. The cost was measured in something less visible but more important. The cost was the severing of a relationship. The relationship between a person and the act of keeping themselves warm, between a family and the knowledge that they could handle winter on their own terms. The Amish never had that relationship severed because they never agreed to the terms. They watched the system form around the rest of America, and they quietly, without drama or protest, continued doing what had always worked. They kept building barrel stoves. They kept passing the design down. They kept teaching their children how to read a fire, how to source fuel from what was already around them, how to build and maintain a heating system that owed nothing to anyone. And in doing so, they preserved something that goes far deeper than practical knowledge. They preserved a psychology, a way of being in the world that starts from capability rather than dependency, that starts from the assumption that you can handle the fundamental things. That warmth, like so much else, is a skill before it is a commodity. There's a particular feeling that comes from being warm in a way you built yourself. People who have experienced it describe it in remarkably similar terms regardless of where they live or how they grew up. They say it feels quiet. They say it feels like something settles in their chest that they did not know was unsettled. They describe the absence of a background anxiety they had grown so accustomed to that they had stopped recognizing it as anxiety at all. It is the feeling of not owing anyone for the warmth in the room, of knowing that if the truck does not come, if the grid goes down, if the bill arrives, and you simply cannot pay it this month, the fire will still burn. The house will still be warm. Your family will still be fine. Because the knowledge lives in you. Because you built the thing. Because the fuel is in the woodpile out back, and in the cardboard stacked in the garage, and in the fallen branches across the field, and it is not going anywhere. There's a reason we respond so deeply to stories about self-sufficiency. It is not nostalgia, though it can look like nostalgia from the outside. It is something older and more fundamental than that. Psychologists who study what they call agency, the sense that your actions matter, that you are the author of your own life rather than a passenger in someone else's system, consistently find that it is one of the most powerful predictors of well-being across every demographic they study, the feeling of capability, of competence, of being someone who solves problems rather than someone who pays to have them managed. That feeling is not a luxury. It is not optional. It is as close to a core human need as anything researchers have ever measured. And the quiet tragedy of modern life is how systematically and deliberately it has been extracted from us, often in the name of convenience, often in the name of progress, always in a way that happens to create a recurring revenue stream for someone else. What the Amish preserved is not just a stove design. It is not just a heating technique. It is a proof of concept, a living, working demonstration that a different relationship with the fundamental needs of life is still possible, that you do not have to accept the subscription model as the only model. That warmth and food and water and shelter and the 100 other things modern life has turned into monthly obligations can still, if you choose, be things you own outright, not things you rent from the system at whatever price it decides to charge this February. There's a man in Holmes County, Ohio, who has never paid a heating bill. Neither did his father. Neither did his grandfather. He heats his home with a stove his grandfather built in 1942 from a 55-gallon drum and $46 worth of cast iron hardware. When the snow comes sideways across his fields in January and the temperature drops to single digits, he is in his kitchen in shirt sleeves. Not because he is extraordinary, not because he has resources the rest of us lack, because he has knowledge, because he has a relationship with warmth that nobody ever managed to take from him. And when he told me that the warmest house is the one that does not owe anybody anything, I did not hear him talking about heating. I heard him talking about freedom, about the specific, quiet, unshakable kind of freedom that comes not from money or politics or ideology, but from simply knowing how to take care of yourself and the people you love without asking anyone's permission. That freedom is still available. It did not disappear. It was not burned in some fire or lost in some flood. It was quietly, methodically, deliberately moved out of view, placed behind regulations and building codes and marketing campaigns designed to make you feel that dependency was modernity and self-sufficiency was something quaint and unserious. It was placed out of view. But it was not destroyed. The knowledge still exists. The stove design still works. The fuel is still all around you, in your woodpile, in your cardboard, in the fallen branches after a storm. The chimney is probably still in your basement wall, capped and forgotten, waiting. The question is not whether you can take this back. You can. The question is whether you will decide that you want to, whether you are willing to do the small, unglamorous, entirely manageable work of reclaiming a relationship with your own home that a market spent 40 years convincing you to give away. Because on the other side of that work is not just a lower heating bill, it is something much more valuable than that. It is the feeling of walking down to your basement on the coldest night of the year, opening a door of cast iron, putting in an armful of fuel you found or salvaged or split yourself, and knowing that whatever happens outside, whatever the grid does, whatever the fuel prices do, whatever the trucks decide, the house will be warm because you made it warm. Because that is still a thing a person can do. Because that knowledge still lives. Because some communities never let it go. And now, neither do you. If what you just heard resonates with something you have been feeling for a long time, without quite having the words for it, there is more where this came from. Subscribe to Secret Fix Vault, where every week we go deeper into the practical knowledge that was working just fine before someone decided we should all pay monthly for things our grandparents owned outright. The next piece is already waiting for you.